In this video, I'm going to make an argument that there's something that's more important than speaking the truth, and that is being able to handle the truth. And a few things about this. One is, I'm not sure I 100% believe that handling the truth would win out in a head-to-head battle against speaking the truth, and certainly not in all cases. But a lot of people will say how important it is to speak the truth, speak your truth. That's a huge focus of so many people. And yet, I think if you're speaking the truth, but you can't handle the truth, then the quality of the truth you have to speak is actually going to depreciate over time. In fact, it's going to get really warped, and it's probably less likely to be true if you cannot handle the truth yourself. Now, this video is going to seem a little bit aimed at the personal, like at your personal character, which might seem kind of out of character for this channel, but I do think this is actually essential if we're thinking about systems and we're thinking about the information sphere, social media. I think part of the distortion that's going on in the economy right now is due to the fact that the main source of power, both political power and economic power, is being able to convince a bunch of people that something is true, whether or not it is. But when convincing them of that serves the interests and power, that kind of stuff. So even though this seems very personal in the way I'm describing it in this video, I think it really helps us understand the systemic, the way the economy is structured, the way the online environment is structured. And in a different video, I will take this out of the personal realm and look more at the structure of information environments, particularly education and social media environments, to think about how can we fight propaganda? Because I think this principle is going to be essential to fighting propaganda. So first, what do I even mean by handling the truth? And there's going to be three parts to this, where the first one is that you don't shoot the messenger. You don't punish the person who is delivering the truth to you. And I think this is one of the more important ones, because if we create an environment where anyone who gives us a truth that is uncomfortable or hard to hear or upsets you, anyone who does that is punished by you. Your social environment and your personal information environment is going to have a lot less truth in it. Like, people around you will pick up on that, and they'll be afraid to give you truths that you might respond negatively to. So that's piece number one. Piece number two is more about what's going on inside your head. And this is when you hear a truth that is uncomfortable, or that you would need to process a little bit more to have it even make sense in your worldview. When you encounter those uncomfortable truths, do you diminish their salience? Do you sort of put them out of mind and say, I'm just not going to think about that. I don't need to think about that. It's too uncomfortable. And of course, handling the truth would mean actually, if it's an uncomfortable truth, maybe you're not quite in a state where you can clearly look at that right now, or maybe it's too emotional right now, but you don't completely dismiss it. You say, okay, I can't quite make sense of that. I can't quite handle that right now. I'll put it aside and come back to it. And then the third piece of handling the truth is just developing in yourself the ability to look at an uncomfortable or emotionally challenging truth in a way that is clear-minded. And I mean, this may include things like being aware of your own emotions, because in certain emotional states, you are not going to see hard truths clearly. In certain emotional states, your view of everything is distorted by your emotion. And waiting to look clearly at a truth that might be difficult means being aware of, when am I in a mood where I can actually see things as they are and try to fit this new piece of information into my worldview, or even try to dismiss it. Maybe that new truth is actually not a truth. Maybe you have reason to believe that it's false, but you need to inspect it first with a clear mind before you dismiss it. So that's basically what I mean when I say handling the truth. Now, there's a couple of ideas that I think are important to wrestle with a little bit before I get into some examples. And the first one, I actually think I need to make an argument for this, which is the truths that are most important for us to see are oftentimes the hardest for us to look at straightforward. And this includes truth about the ways that you need to grow. The second category of truth that's hard to hear emotionally, but that is more important, is truths that sort of contradict your current worldview. So you feel a discomfort looking at this new information because it would require you to actually restructure your worldview a little bit to make adjustments to fit that in if it's true. And if we don't get in the habit of doing that, of course, then our worldviews don't update unless the update is like easy to add onto our worldview, so we don't learn and grow. And I actually do think a lot of important truths about the world are in tension with each other. Like two things that actually seem contradictory may both be true. And to actually make sense of the fact that they're both true, you have to really think carefully about the nuance of how people work or how the world works. So that's another reason why the most important truths are actually harder to hear. And then my final point on this topic is whenever we encounter conflict in our lives, whether it's with another person or a group of people that we disagree with religiously or politically or whatnot, a lot of times the source of that conflict comes from a genuine misunderstanding where they think of the world really differently than you. And to resolve that conflict, you're actually kind of going to have to go to that place that's the most uncomfortable in the middle of the conflict to figure out how they think about the world differently and how you can reconcile the two viewpoints. Let me just go through 4 cases where you can think of these vivid examples of situations where being able to handle the truth well matters more than speaking your own truth or than sharing your truth. So the first one of these is going to be feedback at work. And I'm a professor, so I get student feedback, and anyone who's ever taught knows that there's going to be a range of student comments. And there's always going to be a couple that are quite painful and that are phrased in a pretty mean way and that just sort of point out things that it's like, did they have to say that? And to actually grow as a teacher, one of the things is you realize even if the majority of students are saying great things, you still have room to grow. And it's the students who make the negative comments that might be more in touch with the ways you need to grow. And it could be that 90% of hard to hear truths are completely bogus and not truths at all. But the 10% that are, those are the 10% that are sort of your pathway to personal growth. And so this is a situation where if you are the kind of professor who communicates, I can hear the truth. I want to hear the truth from you. And if you're able to do that more often and integrate that into your course, you are eventually going to grow at a faster pace than a professor where all the students know they react negatively, they punish those who make negative comments about them. You sort of shut out the possibility of receiving as much feedback as you otherwise could. So it's both, once again, I'm highlighting this point that it's both about opening yourself up to receiving more truth from the community around you that has the ability to give it to you, and also your ability to sift through and wisely take in truths that are hard. My second example here is really simple. This is just if you're trying to develop your skill at something like, let's just say the violin, And we know that deliberate practice, where you practice something, but then you notice what's the next thing for me to do to grow. And you're getting feedback from coaches, you're paying a lot of high quality attention to that thing you need to improve. Then the way this plays out in that situation is sometimes the feedback you might be getting from your coach, the feedback they give you that is most frustrating might actually make it feel like you're taking 2 steps backwards when you incorporate their feedback. Like it could be that your fingers are just slightly off and you've gotten in the habit of having your fingers in that way when you're playing. But the coach recognizes if you want to achieve excellence, you're going to have to shift the way your fingers are when you're playing the violin. When you shift that, it's going to feel really weird to play the violin with that new fingering positioning. And you're actually probably going to get worse, and maybe even worse for quite a while before playing with the new fingering recommendation starts to feel natural. So if you're developing a skill, then the natural resistance to perform well, or the natural tendency to perform well and to want to do something that will impress others and that feels like you're mastering it, that actually has to be overcome by the recognition that incorporating feedback that will make you worse temporarily is actually the pathway to greatness eventually. So that's another example of your ability to incorporate and handle truths, including if they'll give you a temporary setback. That's going to be essential if you want to do good, deliberate practice. Now, my next example is kind of a sad one. This would be truths about your potential. So if you are convinced you're going to become an opera star and you're investing a lot of time and money and you're going to opera school, it could be that actually you don't really have the potential to do that, and the likelihood of that anyway, even if you did have the potential, is low. Those truths are going to be incredibly painful to hear. Like, those truths shatter your hope. But being able to handle those truths could open the door to a different pathway that you could invest time and money and energy in that will actually bear more fruit, or is more likely to bear fruit. So that's another example. If you can actually listen carefully enough to the feedback you're getting to tell, is this particular pathway going to pay off for you? Or at least develop a better internal sense of the likelihood of that, such that you can guide your own life the best. And my last example here is going to be, actually, I've kind of already given this example, which is when you're in conflict with another person or another group, being able to encounter the truth that's sort of at the heart of your conflict or your disagreement. A lot of times that truth is going to involve acknowledging the parts of your own side of this argument that are not quite holding up, or that have issues with them. And if you can show the other person you can hear it, you're probably going to open them up more to hearing your viewpoints, which will sort of cool down the temperature in the room of that conflict. And the room of the conflict could be like it could be at a bigger level than interpersonal, but that's not for this video. But I think one of the things that's hard about that is when I'm talking about handling the truth, part of that deal is that you're feeling internally your emotional state, and you're asking the question, am I in an emotional state to be able to clearly see the truth? And in the middle of conflict, the answer is probably no. Probably you're so keyed up that you can't really look at the truths they're saying clearly. Which is why I do think it can sometimes help to take a break, and maybe even a long enough break, like a week or so, where you can kind of reflect on what the other person has said. Now, of course, the problem there is if someone is not good at handling the truth, what could happen during that week is they could sort of build up all of this cognitive armor against hearing the truth They could perseverate and have all these conversations in their head where you're saying things you would never say, and that can make it worse. But if you have two people who are both good at handling the truth, then those people can use the time away from the conflict to find moments when they can critically evaluate the whole situation.